Writing social communication goals can be really difficult, so we've created a step-by-step process. The process starts with what you're already doing and what we already know by matching what's working for the student, and we used the observation tool to do that. We can use any assessment data that you might have or any additional data that you've collected using the MetaMap. Then you'll sit with your team and you'll just brainstorm. What are the possibilities? What's next? And we can use developmental checklists or standards. And then you're going to continue to brainstorm while reviewing the triad information. And then you're going to write a goal. And then you're going to go back and review that goal again using the triad information. And then you're going to create a unique data collection sheet just for that goal. So here's an example of how that might work. At the face-to-face meeting, you met Amy. And we decided that after watching the video, that Amy had a lot of strengths. She was able to answer questions. She really knew herself and was able to describe her interests and her future plans. She had really good nonverbal skills. And Amy did ask a question. Although we didn't see the communication partner in this video, when talking about it, we knew that when there were extended pauses, that really increased Amy's anxiety. So that's something we thought was important to note. And in the communicative environment, we felt that Amy really knew what was expected when trying to explain about herself or her ideas. So that kind of routine or predictable conversation was a place where she might be more successful. So when brainstorming about next steps for Amy in step 2 of this process, we really thought about what is the skill, the knowledge or strategy that really will make the most impact here for Amy. So looking at the MetaMap, or actually you can also look at the quick reference sheet that you downloaded, we brainstormed some things thinking about what would really move Amy forward. And we felt like that was getting her partner engaged, really having more of a balance in the conversation where her responses were contingent on what her communication partner said. So first, when brainstorming the triad and thinking about the student, or Amy in this case, we knew that if the priority is engagement, and for Amy it looks like it's that extended engagement that's really going to be the most meaningful and make the most difference, the priority for her is really getting to know others. So what would engagement look like for Amy? She would initiate and she would respond contingently, maybe maintain the conversation long enough to give her the opportunity to learn about her communication partner, and to do that in a way that's really natural and comfortable. While brainstorming, it also helped us to go back to the big ideas. Amy was motivated to build a relationship. And we can expect competency from Amy. And we did notice that when there were long periods of silence or pauses, that it made Amy anxious. And so one thing that her communication partner might do is really look at that wait time and keep it at a comfortable place. But really it was that extended engagement that could help Amy with that theory of mind peace. And when looking at the communication partner for Amy, as mentioned before, we would want to minimize stress and support just enough. And questioning would be okay, but we would really want to focus on fair questions that we know she could answer. And we might want to model those routine conversations because we know she's pretty comfortable talking about things she's familiar with. And so we might have some familiar conversations that we practice, like always talking about what we did over the weekend. And we may need to prompt, but we would have to really consider, as always with prompts, how we were going to fade those out. We also thought that visual prompts might be a good idea. Maybe having a cue card that had some go-to questions that she could ask if she got stuck. Or maybe a cue card that reminded her to respond to what the other person was saying, or to be really an active listener. And again, maybe that familiar conversation would decrease that anxiety or stress. Now we're ready to write a goal. We're going to use all this brainstorming information to write a goal that anyone reading it could understand exactly what they needed to do to support the goal. They would know exactly what the student needs to do. And of course, as always, when writing a goal, we have to make sure that everything we're looking for is observable and measurable. And then finally in the goal, we'll have to truly define what success looks like, whether that's frequency, rate, duration, but some concrete measurement. So here's a stab at a goal that we wrote for Amy. Amy will independently make comments and ask questions to engage her communication partner in comfortable and balanced conversations, as judged by outside observers, at least once a day. We thought this was a good start. But is it measurable? Is success really clear? Do we need the number of questions or comments or the length of the conversation? Well, before we really can determine the answer to that question, we have to consider the idea of obligatory context. So that really asks, what does the situation call for? So for example, sometimes I see goals that are written around eye contact. So it might say something like, the child will maintain eye contact for 3 seconds. Well, is that really fair? Is eye contact always, or 3 seconds worth of eye contact, always really what's called for in an interaction? If a child is in parallel play with another child, then eye contact isn't even appropriate. So for Amy, a conversation may only have or need one question. One question may prompt the topic that the rest of the conversation is all comments. And so we have to really think about, would it make sense to keep track of the number of questions and comments here? And we felt like, no, not really. Our goal is engagement. So how can we focus on that? Our team felt like Amy has so many skills in conversations, but what we're really looking for is that comfortable and balanced conversation. So can we operationally define comfortable and balanced? We can. We decided that comfortable really meant appropriate interaction with no clearly long or awkward pauses. Balanced can be defined as a consistent engagement where Amy takes the lead more than once by asking questions or building on what her partner said. And we know that some of this is subjective, and we just have to be okay with that. This is the qualitative data that we were talking about. Now, as we take qualitative data, we can see, and we'll show you on the data collection sheet, how that can become quantitative. But the idea of comfortable being an appropriate interaction with no long or awkward pauses is very subjective. But we know what appropriate is. We're all good communicators, and we know if it feels right. And so we can determine as a team what that is, and that can become very important qualitative data. But we're not done yet. We still want to go back and look at the triad once more and continue to determine how we'll measure success and how we'll be sure that we have all the supports we need and the steps that we need to create for the student to be successful reaching this goal. As we continued to talk about Amy's goal, we thought it might be really important to consider the familiarity of the conversation and how familiar she is with the communication partner. So for Amy, we might make additional steps in achieving this goal. So depending on the opportunities that we know we'll have with Amy, we might know that independence is the goal, but we might say Amy will be able to do this with a familiar partner in a practiced conversation with cue cards a certain percent of the time or numbers of presented opportunities, and then take it to the next level where she does it with a familiar partner but with a new conversation and still with visual supports. And then a next step might be by removing those visual supports. And so we would scaffold this success, and maybe the measures would be in each step of the objective. But we know that everyone, every team, every district has certain requirements around how they write measurable goals. So we know the measures are really important, and that's going to be up to every team in every district. But what we're saying is important here is to really identify those steps and levels of support when engagement is the goal and independence is the measure. So when we write a social communication goal, it can look pretty wordy or even cumbersome at first, but when we think about all the information that a person would need to support that goal and to support that student to be successful, it really is important information. And we need that same important information on our data collection sheet. So this is an example of a data collection sheet that we created for Amy. And remember we talked about the idea of her communication partner being familiar or unfamiliar, and then that would be important information for us, because we're thinking that an unfamiliar communication partner is going to be more challenging. And the same with the conversation topics. Something familiar is going to be easier than something unfamiliar. We also decided that we wanted to keep track of the conversation length, because that extended engagement was our goal. So it would be important to know if we were making progress in that area of having longer conversations. We also talked about whether we would use a cue card or not, or ask fair questions, whether or not we modeled, and we could even add information to those depending on our student and what we thought would be important as our team. We may want to know what kinds of questions or what the cue card said. But again, these are team decisions, and it's important to take the time to talk about that so that as a team we're really knowing where we're going with this student and whether or not we're making progress. These next two areas are the qualitative data that we talked about. So we really have operationally defined balanced conversations in our goal, and that would need to be written in the goal. But to take data on that, we took some ideas from RADO 2011, and we created kind of a continuum of skills. And so we could pick a number, and we could decide of between 1 and 7 where that conversation fell that day. Was it withdrawn or unengaged, or was Amy highly engaged in the conversation, leading most of the conversation and enjoying the interaction? The same is true with whether or not the conversation was comfortable. And we talked about how subjective that was. But again, if we put these numbers to these descriptions, that's really important information for our team. And when we look at whether or not the conversation was consistently comfortable and enjoyable for both partners, that's really true success. And we had already said that for Amy, that a balanced, comfortable conversation would be a really meaningful goal. Difficult, again, because of that obligatory context. Is it appropriate to ask him to use 3 different functions of communication where really just requesting and gaining attention may have been appropriate in that interaction? Or maybe it was just the time to greet someone or gain their attention. So we thought it would be important to keep a number of possible communication functions. This would be the type of a goal that would be great for augmentative and alternative communication users. And again, depending on the individual needs of the student, the role of the communication partner would really need to be further described. So for Parker, we talked about the communication partner needing to be able to follow his lead and share control, model, or say it as he would if he could. But for an AAC user, there may be additional responsibilities of the communication partner in modeling the device or having another child model the use of the device. We would also want to add to the goal, whether it be in objectives or how we measure the goal, the types of prompts, and again, whether he's doing it in imitation or if he's doing it independently, how much and what kind of modeling we would do. We may need to put information on how much wait time or what to do to have the expectant delay where he really knows that we're expecting him to take a turn. And the data collection for this kind of a goal would also need to be very specific, where we're really looking at what kind of prompting or modeling we're doing. The level of prompting, is it a verbal prompt or a physical prompt? Are we modeling, and how many times are we doing that? What functions were presented, and how many of those that were presented were used by the student? Would we want to take data on the types of verbs he used or whose name he was using? And again, is it going to be important to know if this was a familiar interaction, or is this a novel routine? Is it a familiar person or a novel or a new person? So all of this information is really going to help us know if we're being successful and really moving towards independence. And every goal is going to be different and require different data collection. Another strategy we used at the face-to-face is just to look at these 3 big areas of communicative engagement. And we've kind of talked about conversational and emerging language. So our next example is going to be that before words type of goal. So let's say we went through the steps and we came up with this goal. What would the data collection sheet look like for this goal? I think it would be important to take data on how the student initiated. What did he do to make that initiation? Was it verbal, nonverbal? Remember, nonverbal is much of what we do in engagement. Which routines were presented? Were they familiar? Were they motivating? Who was supporting them? Was that a person that this student had a relationship with? Remember, it's really important to go back to those big ideas. And most importantly, we need to always consider that level of support. We know independence is our goal, but obviously there are so many things we need to do to support the student to that level of independence. So we've talked about so many things in data collection as being so much more than percentages or hatch marks of how many times a student did something, that we really need both quantitative and qualitative data. And data that just is not necessarily got a quantitative piece. It's really great to have that qualitative data on, things just felt really great today. And if that happens 5 days in a row, then we can say things are feeling better consistently over 5 days and then 2 months. And so qualitative data is really important. And I think levels of support is equally important, as is when to take the data, where we're going to take the data, who's going to take the data. All are really leading towards those steps of independence. We know independence is our goal, but what are we going to do to get there? Our data collection sheets are really going to give us that information that we need to keep a student moving. And that leads us back to evidence-based practice as a decision-making process. What is our educational question? If it is our student making progress? Or what do we need to do to help our student make progress? Or is this the right goal we need to be working on? We now have that internal evidence. We have that data that is our educator expertise. And in the beginning of this module, you looked at that external evidence and critically appraised that literature to see if it fit in this triangle. And now you can really make an informed decision for your student, and you can evaluate that decision. We have considered now and integrated the student and family values and priorities, the external data, and our own internal data, our educator expertise, to know exactly why we are doing what we're doing and whether or not it's working. And there's a bonus. You can use these goals for the coaching module. In Module 6 in the Collaborative Coaching Framework assignment, we started it at the face-to-face and we asked you to put in a goal. And at that time you used your meta information to create a goal. But I think now you're going to have even more information on a goal that is really going to move your student forward. And the assignment for this module is simply that, to collaboratively create a social communication goal. So you can work as a group and all come up with one goal, but we would like everyone to go ahead and copy and paste it in the link provided in the module so that we can be sure everyone gets credit. And then I want you to go ahead and try taking data on that goal. And as a team, create a really innovative data collection tool. And then just let us know how that went. What's going to work? How are you going to be able to do that for all of your students, for all of your social communication goals? Because we realize it's a lot of work. So let's start a discussion in our discussion board on what works. All right, we'll see you in Module 6.